I would say that as much of a distinguishing factor in many ways, the most popular of the works. It's not super different from manga is what I would say. Like there might, it reads left to right. There's color differences, but I would say that a lot of the tropes are largely the same. And I think we've gotten to the point where there's a lot of media, especially comics, which have been inspired by manga as it is. So that's sort of my thought on Korean comics in terms of its differences with manga.
Hi, my name is Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where we get a chance to sit down with the movers and shakers of the comic book industry, the people who keep all the trains running on time, and who introduce us to new voices. This week, my guest is Mark Vera. I've known Mark now, he's been in the comics industry for seemingly, I don't know, it's weirdly forever, and yet he's always seems to be the youngest person in the room. I don't know how he pulls it off. Mark came into our industry through Viz, now is with the Yin Press, and has done amazing work in pushing manga from other countries into the direct market and all over the world. And I'm so happy to finally get you on the show. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. Yeah, happy to be here, and thank you very much for the great introduction.
Of course, it is funny. You have seemingly are this person who came in suddenly, and suddenly everybody knew you. And I see behind you. You said that this is your childhood collection. Obviously, this is deep in your bones. You come by this honest, as we would say.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Definitely a fan.
Yeah, it was complete coincidence, but it's kind of a great one that, I happen to be here right as we're doing this recording. It's Thanksgiving week. I'm visiting the folks for Thanksgiving. So what better of a place to have a retrospective of my career in the comics and manga industry than a room that started it all, a room that kind of nurtured a love for this content.
I love that. I want to get into a little bit of that where you started, but I do want to start with can you tell us what it is? I really, having only watched movies that I'm sure were poorly dubbed at the time, tell me about Shaolin Kung Fu, because apparently this is a big part of your life. No?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it is. It is good research there. Yeah, and it's interesting that we're talking about it and starting with that, because my love for Chinese martial arts, for Chinese kung fu started around the time where I became a big fan of comics and manga. This is something that I've been doing since I was a freshman in high school. And I guess to sort of address the appeal of it, I mean, I'm as 90s kid as you can get, right? I was at a time where Mortal Kombat was hot, where there was a lot of the kids movies like, like Three Ninjas. I feel like, just wait a couple of months and you'd see some Power Rangers show or some movie about kids becoming ninjas or something like that. And I think to this day, I don't know if martial arts has been as commercially successful as it was back then. So let's just say I was born around and grew up around the perfect time to become a big fan of martial arts, and kung fu was a style that really appealed to me. I mean, I brought up Mortal Kombat, and I remember there were two things that happened my freshman year. One is that Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance came out, and I just bring that one up specifically because out of all the Mortal Kombats, that's the one that showed the different martial arts style. They're like, oh, this guy does Northern Shaolin, this guy does Mantis, this guy does Tai Chi. So it was a perfect game to sort of help me nerd out about Chinese martial arts. And I also got into Ranma 1/2.
Different styles of movement inside of the game?
Exactly.
Oh,
yeah, in the
awesome.
game you could switch styles. Everybody has two martial arts styles and the weapons. So perfect game to nerd out about martial arts. And getting into Ranma 1/2 helped me nerd out even further. So yeah, that's sort of the genesis of it. It's still something I do to this day. And to be completely honest, and I think a lot of the people you speak to and the people who would be listening to this can can sympathize with what I'm about to say. A lot of times I let work really take over my life. So it's nice to have something
Yeah.
like martial arts to get me out. Like I can look back, even, not even that long ago, just a couple of weeks ago. I have a session with my teacher, and I'm thinking maybe it would be better to cancel this session. Like I have this work to do, and then I go there and I do it, and I
Yeah.
realize it's the best thing I've done all week because it was the only
Oh yeah.
3 hour period in that whole week where I didn't think about work. And I love my job. It's the only reason why I can let it take over my life as much as I did. But it did show me doing this martial arts class, how important it is to have something outside of it. So I guess I hope
100%.
hope that answered the question. So that, answered the original appeal and the importance it has on my life today.
Oh, sure. I mean, I can tell you, I named the company Prana Direct Market Solutions, because that's where we work, but Prana, as a reference to the yogic principle of Prana, what we breathe. And because yoga has been a huge part of my life. And now I think, especially in this past year, I've been able to prioritize that like 3 to 5 times a week being in
Mm,
that room. And it makes all the difference in the world for my concentration, for my creativity. It's everything. Like you just
yeah,
start to feel right in your body, you know?
for
Yeah,
sure. Oh,
I
then you
completely
can
feel that.
super sympathize. Yeah, that's
Oh,
great. It's great you have
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm still feeling I had a really rough session last night. It was, oh man, I got home wrecked, but it was good. I felt really good about it later. Well, so tell me about growing up. You're in your childhood home. Is it in Hercules,
It is. It is. I'm in
California?
Hercules as we speak. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Tell me about Hercules. Where is that exactly?
So Hercules is a suburb that's I think the major city nearby is Oakland. When I'm outside of
Okay,
California in the Bay Area, I often tell people I live near San Francisco. As big as Oakland is, I'm not sure how recognizable it is in certain parts of the country. So I usually just tell people
sure.
I grew up in a suburb near San Francisco. To talk
Yeah.
about growing up in Hercules is a little difficult for me because Hercules in many ways was just a city where I would go to sleep and I guess take
Mm,
martial arts classes too. I went to elementary and middle school in a city called Richmond, another smaller city near Oakland, and I went to high school in Concord, California. I was a student at a high school called De La Salle, which is known as this football powerhouse. They actually went over a decade without losing a single football game. The varsity team not losing a single football game. And this is also a high school that was very close to Flying Colors Comics, a store that you
I
and
was
I
gonna
are, of
ask.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Joe Field's Flying Colors Comics, right by De La Salle High School.
Really? You were
Yeah,
right next door. That's crazy.
yeah,
Were
I
you a
would say
regular?
like 10 minutes. I became more of a regular my sophomore year. Like the entire freshman year, I knew there was a comic shop. Didn't step inside. Sophomore year is where I became a bit more of a regular. I think that was the time where my nerdiness had fully set in. That was a time where, let's see, I was a super manga kid for one, super
Mm-hmm.
Japanese RPG kid for two, and also starting to become a big fan of Marvel Comics by way of X-Men. So I was, yeah, towards the end,
Sure.
the holiday season of my sophomore year, I ended up becoming a regular at Flying Colors Comics and kind of just buying a lot. Like that's what was cool about the store, is that it had everything to appeal to my various tastes. A nice selection of manga, action figures for, that tied into the JRPGs I was playing at the time, and tons of back issues. Because a lot of my relationship with these comic characters was through websites, through a DK encyclopedia, but I still wanted to experience these adventures firsthand. So it was amazing that I was
Sure.
able to go through their back issue archive and get a lot. You bring up the youth, but I'm old enough to know a time where these weren't just something I could read online or through Comixology or through Marvel's own app. This was having to
Right.
dig through through back issues.
You felt like an archaeologist, right? And, you
I
find
did,
this
yeah.
issue, you finally get to read it. Oh yeah, that was the juice. Kids today will never know. They'll never know
No,
that
no,
that
yeah,
juice you get from finding that missing
yeah,
issue and finally understanding that one character moment. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like, hey,
they'll never
you
get it.
kids are doing this because of the perceived value. I was doing it just to find out what happened to X-Man in issue 4.
100%. 100%. I have to ask it. I'm going to show off this because I think this is the most adorable thing in the time that we've been doing the research on our various guests. Rarely have I stumbled across your high school live journal,
Oh my God.
and
Amazing. I'm proud of that live journal, so I'm glad you're bringing it up. God, your research is spot on. But please continue, Adam.
so how acclaimed were you in your role in Gypsy? That's really what I want to know. And was
Oh
that
man,
formative for you?
it wasn't a major role, but I would say that I made a lot of it. Theater was something that I wish I had done earlier on, right? Like I guess I did try. I auditioned for a comedy my sophomore year. Did not do well, but did not also know what I was doing or getting into. So I didn't truly pursue theater until my senior year. Like this is my last year of high school. I had become a fan of theater, so I'm like, why not try to make the most of it?
Want to
And
go
I was
for it?
in, yeah, the drama, the musical, and the comedy. Like that's how De La Salle did things. There would be 3 plays a year. I participated in all of them, though to smaller degrees. So not a big part of Gypsy, but what I am happy to say is I was easily the best dancer in that musical, despite the
Oh
the
yeah,
lack. Oh yeah, yeah, I could safely say that, and that's also thanks to the martial arts, being able to
100%.
pick up movements. If I could do this Shaolin kung fu set, I could learn a tap dance. Hell yeah! So
That's
good
awesome.
experience. Yeah, good experience. Good experience. That was a fun way to end my high school career.
I have no doubt. Did you follow that at all? Post like where did you think you cuz I'm showing University of San Francisco right
Hmm.
after. Where
Yeah,
what were your focuses?
I ended up being a business major.
Okay.
But to go to before I chose the business major, I remember I took AP Studio Art my senior year of high school. Another thing that I did back then, and the teacher had, let's do a survey. And it's like, what do you want to do? And I think I put, musician, actor, comic book writer, basically nothing, all the arts, like no practical job. And I bring that story up to give
Right.
a sense of the direction I wanted to take my life. I wanted to be a creator of sorts. I wanted to be surrounded by storytelling and emotions and all of that other great stuff. And my parents, being more practical people than I was at the time, me wanting to go to art school, wanting to go to the Academy of Art in San Francisco, said, can you choose something maybe a little more practical, and if you finish that up, then you could go pursue the arts. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll go do business. So that's what brought me to become a business major. And knowing what I know now, if I were to give advice to a younger Mark de Vera, uh, no, I'd be like, hey, a lot of people don't necessarily get jobs in what they major, so you may as well major in what you want to do and just try to get as much internship and work experience as you could get. That's the advice I would give. But I bring all of this up to show why somebody who was so clearly interested in the arts went and became a business major. Little did I know I would end up loving business later on. So it all worked out. I'd
Right.
say life worked out pretty well for me.
I think
I
it's
don't know. Yeah.
there's so many of us though that fall in love with the business side of the arts, right? I
Yeah,
think that's
definitely.
really I think a big premise of the show, I think in many
For
ways
sure.
and
For
of my own
sure.
career is that, right? Is that you fall in love with this art form so much so that you want to make sure that other people can do it. And you want to be the one who helps, the one who creates opportunities
Yeah.
for that. I think that's really wonderful. Yeah. But you did some internship though creatively, right? Just outside of that, I show that you went to the California Film Institute as
Yes,
a
I did. I did. I wish that internship was more involved than it ended up being. I wish I started doing internships earlier on, but that was literally some experience where I I helped promote a film. I got my toes wet a little bit, but like I mentioned, I
right.
think I think knowing what I know now, I could easily see that it could have been a more involved experience. And that's actually something that I've carried with me today. I've had the opportunity to mentor others, whether they be interns or full-time employees at, both Yen Press and Viz, the two companies I've worked at. And I didn't really think of this until now, but I think that might have been a formative experience where I think, hey, you know what? For as long as somebody is here as my intern or my employee, I want them to learn something. Because
Yeah,
I wouldn't say that I didn't learn anything from that experience, but people are spending their time at this internship when they could be doing something else, right? Like it was an internship where I was really only active a couple hours every week, maybe, right? And had I known that,
okay,
then that I might have had the opportunity to try to intern somewhere where I might have gotten a bit more value or might have learned more. So because of that, I'm like,
sure.
you're my intern, you're my employee, you're gonna learn a hell of a lot when you make your resume after this. Our time together is up. Your resume is going to look that much more impressive. That is a goal that I've
Yeah.
made more for myself with everybody I've had the pleasure of mentoring.
I genuinely do love that, because I do think that, I mean, that's why I pick different projects. It's not just about what is going to be the most lucrative. It's about what am I going to learn?
Yeah,
What am I going
for
to be able
sure,
to
for
create?
sure. Yeah.
And you should be able to give that back. One of my favorite pieces of advice on any of this was, I don't know if you know, at Diamond Comics, the Tim Lanahan is the head of buying,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. Of course.
yeah, his boss at the time. This was post Bill Shanus. Oh, I wish I could remember the guy's name. But we're going in for a meeting with this guy, and we are talking about Tim being so bright, because he was his number two. And he goes, yeah, when I always have this one goal when I have someone like Tim is I want to be training my replacement, because
Mm,
at some point I'm going to do something else and I want them to be able to step into my role. And that sort of confidence I've always loved is if you can be confident enough that you're teaching your team to be, to fill in for you when you're ready to move on. You're doing it right,
yeah,
and it also kind of pushes you forward too, because
for
you can't just
sure,
stay
for
in one
sure.
spot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Sure. So then I mean, obviously, we're doing a time of life where you're volunteering, you're interning. This seems to be where you make that leap into what becomes your career path, which is you start to volunteer as a marketing assistant at Viz Pictures.
Yes, yes.
Tell me about that experience. What is this? Do you know at this point that you're stepping into like a ladder, or what? Do you get a
I
feeling for
th-
that?
I thought I was. Yeah, I did. It's an interesting story for how I started interning with Viz Pictures and new people. So let me give some background first. So the founder of Viz Media was a man named Seiji Horobuchi, a guy who's a hippie. To be frank, he's a hippie who was reading Domu, I believe, by Katsuhiro Otomo, the creator of Akira, and
Mm-hmm.
said, "Wow, wouldn't it be amazing if a work like this could be read by English readers?" Uh, the irony is that he's not the one who ended up publishing it. I think it was Studio Proteus and Dark Horse who published it. But nonetheless, this story
Still.
inspired Seiji Horobuchi to pursue English language or manga translated in English to be read by many others. So anyway, this man was the founder of Viz Media. Uh, Eventually, later decided he wanted to move on to other opportunities. This is around the 2010s, and I think there might have been some separation with him and Viz already in the 2000s. But 2010 is the official separation where he's like, I'm going to start something new. And he started a company called New People, which is effectively a cultural center in San Francisco. Think like a place that has a lot of cool Japanese pop culture or obscure Japanese arts. It's really a hard business to describe. And in addition to
Yeah.
that, he also had the Viz Pictures division and that was a division specifically dedicated to bringing live action film from Japan into America. So those were Seiji's companies, and there was some confusion there because if you have a company called Viz Pictures, you think it's wholly owned by Viz Media. That was not the reality at the time I was working there. They were very much separate companies, still working together, but they were separate companies, separate HR. Just they weren't. I was not working at Viz Media when I was working at Viz Pictures. I didn't know
Gotcha.
any of that when I started talking to people at Viz Pictures. I remember being a new people, and I'd gone there a lot, and then just started to get to know some of the staff there. And one of the staff that I got to become friends with was actually their HR manager. And through talking to her, she brings up to me that, hey, Seiji would like you to become an intern for Viz Pictures. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, of course I want to jump at this opportunity. And at that time, I had still thought that the two were connected. Not that I was trying to go in. It was actually kind of enough of an honor to work for Seiji Horobuchi, but I can't deny that the thought of, wow, will this help me get to work at Viz Media, the company that I did want to work at the last 2 years of my college career. Yeah, that was definitely something on my mind as I stepped into Viz Pictures, as I became their intern.
So tell me about that experience. I mean, the concept of interns has come under a lot of fire these last few
Yeah.
years. How do you, when you look back on that experience, what does it mean to you? Do you feel like you were taken advantage of?
No, no, I definitely don't, especially because it ended up being a paid part-time position pretty quickly. So first it was
Okay.
what one would think of with your standard free internship, but
Right.
it was one where I was still able to work part-time. Fresh out of college, I was actually working for my mom, who at the time was selling insurance. So I was able to do that, and also my internship at Viz Pictures. So it seemed like a perfect situation to me. I was starting to learn in a field that I wanted to work at. Got to see friends, got to be in a part of town I liked in San Francisco, Japantown, but also be able to help my mom out and make some money. So I would say that
Right.
was a pretty positive situation, and I'm happy that that was the case. And like I mentioned, very soon after, it ended up being a a paid position where I was helping their J-pop Summit Festival in a variety of ways. So trying to recruit volunteers, trying to sell booth space. Yeah, there was a lot of things I was doing in that position. So, and meeting a lot of people too, and having a lot of fun. So I would say I've been privileged to have had these very positive experiences in my early professional life.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. And those, I mean, those, especially those early experiences, so much end up shaping how you think about your work. That choosing them for whatever reason, I think choosing them feels so important, and yet it's
Y-
also not important at the same time. It's such an interesting time for everybody. I can definitely see how that would land for you. So talk about that transition then. So you're at Viz Pictures. At what point do you start? Are you able to make the switch over to Viz Media, or is there a
Yeah,
time period in between there? Or,
no, there was, and it was a so I eventually learned that Viz Pictures and New People were a separate company. That when I was working
right,
for them, I was not working for Viz Media. But like anybody, I think when you start to work at a company, especially one, and this is like year 1.5 or year 2 of New People in Viz Pictures, so it felt very much like a new company. And as somebody who was in that company at that stage, you feel a bit of ownership and a lot of pride in the smallest achievements that are being done, and like you're really part of something that's starting. So despite the fact that I wasn't working at Viz Media where I wanted to be, I was like, I love this company. I love these people. Let me see this through. But then a coworker of mine, I mentioned they were separate companies, but because they were tied, there were you'd still see Viz Media people coming in and out, or it's like, oh, this employee
sure,
worked at Viz Pictures at the time where they used to work out of the Viz Media building. And one of the I became friends with a couple where the uh, the guy worked IT at Viz, and he knew of this publishing sales assistant position, and they let me know about it because they knew how much I wanted to work at Viz and how much I loved manga. I'd spend nearly all of my disposable income on Viz Media manga. So I yeah, I applied, and around the time that as the application was going, I was also offered to be, an assistant position at New People. So, yeah, it felt like a big decision at the time, but I decided to go with Viz. And seeing how things played out, as much as I love New People, I know I made the right decision.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. So what was your first position there at Viz? Media?
First position, publishing sales assistant, and I stepped in not knowing what publishing sales was. It's just, it's an assistant position. The job description was drafted generally enough where I'm like, I think I have all the relevant knowledge and skills here, and it's one of the only true assistant positions that had come up at the company for quite some time, and I knew because I was checking their job site a lot. So yeah, perfect opportunity.
You saw the opening and you just shot straight through it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
So yeah,
that's excellent.
shout out to Jerome, Abelard, and Audrey. Those are the friends that I alluded to for helping me get my manga career started. I maybe it would have happened eventually, but I think it happened as early as it did because I became friends with the two of them.
So, well, that is actually an excellent point then for those that are, I assume the legions of people who are watching this trying to figure out how to get their start in the comics industry, but you legitimately got yourself into a position where you could become friendly with the people who you would eventually be working for. And then when the opportunity came up, they knew who you were, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's really wonderful. So how was that? Like you now have a academic business background. You obviously have a love for the arts and a love for the stuff. How was that first like real job in publishing for you?
Oh, it was interesting. Honestly, like the first part of me working at Viz felt like an internship in some ways. It was I started working at the company at a very interesting time. I'm pretty sure this info is public, so I don't really feel too bad sharing it, but it was at a time where the manga industry was starting to go down, and there were a series of terminations at Viz, and I was kind of part
Right.
of the rebuild at Viz, right? Like I was, after a couple series of terminations, I was one of the first employees to to be hired. And I don't think I had this full perspective back then, but it's very clear that it's clearer to me now that there was a lot on the mind for leaders there. And even a couple months into me being at Viz, the person who was my boss and hired me ended up leaving for another company. So there was a lot of turmoil. There wasn't really much time to mentor me. And I do remember having some frustration about that. I'm like, hey, I'm here to help. I'm so eager. This is a company I've wanted to work at for so long. And I'm I have to make work for myself. I'm taking 2-hour lunch breaks and I'm organizing shelves, right? And then I
Right.
see a position for a marketing position go up, and I'm like, why are you hiring a marketer? I'm here. And these are the thoughts that I had on my mind. Once again, I'm telling you just
Yeah.
really straightforwardly, like this is what 22-year-old Mark as publishing assistant was thinking. I now have the perspective to understand why things were the way they were, but to sort
Yeah.
of answer your question of what those early days were, there was a good amount of boredom and turmoil at a time where there shouldn't have been, because there was definitely a lot of work to be done.
I have no doubt. I mean, they were the market there for the longest time. If you were
Yeah.
pushing manga, you were dealing with them. So, but you're invariably growing and becoming. I think your final role there is sales and marketing director. Is that?
Oh,
Or no,
no,
I'm
no.
sorry. That's a senior publishing sales manager, right?
You got it. Exactly.
Yeah. How do you? So how long does that take from kind of that non-internship to where you ended up?
Yeah, I would say things started to get busy about a little after half a year of me being in the company, and the change was that others started to join the team, including the person who ended up being my manager, my boss for pretty much my
Mm,
whole time at Viz after that, a man named Kevin Hamrick. But before Kevin joined, I was also joined by a designer, a guy named Alan Hui, who I to this day still look up to as a big brother figure in my life. Somebody who had worked at Image before working at Viz, and with him there was work to be done. Like I mentioned, it's I sort of mentioned this dissatisfaction about this era, but what was nice is that I was given the freedom to kind of do some things on my own, and it's like, okay, well, I think we need these cell
right.
sheets. Hey, maybe us collectively can see what we can do to improve our diamond preview section. Since we're buying our own ad pages, may as well be artsy with it, right? So I would say
Right.
when Alan came, that then it felt, it was nice. I literally had somebody on my team, somebody to collaborate with. And then Kevin came, and there's another person, and then the the marketing manager came, and then there's another person. So I would say that it was at that point that what I call the intern phase ended. That's a time where it really felt
Right.
like there was work to be done, because I had a team to do it with.
And you seem to have, like, this has become your career, at least so far. I'm certain that you have new chapters coming up, but at what point do you start to feel like, okay, this is the thing I'm going to do for a while, right? Is there a crystallized moment for that?
I would say even in those, yeah, it's honestly easier for me to tell you the times where I had the doubts. It was probably in that intern phase, and then after that, I would say that my career has been filled with moments where I'm happy to be here, and I can't believe I'm part of this.
Right.
I started in 2011, and in 2012. Well, actually, no, let's go back to 2011. I remember, and it's interesting where these thoughts of like, I can't believe I'm here. I'm so happy to be part of this industry. Those thoughts would come in. I went to an
Sure.
event that's unfortunately now defunct called Alternative Press Expo, which is,
Oh yeah,
small.
Ape in
Yeah,
San
yeah, Ape.
Francisco.
Oh my God,
Oh,
I
in
love
San
Ape.
Jose,
Yeah.
rather.
Oh, you know what?
In
It
San.
was in San Francisco for the ones I went to. I think you're right, though. It
Okay.
was in San Jose for a period, but I remember going there, and even though it's not really a manga event, it's still, I'm like, I work in comics. I know I work in manga, but I work in
Yeah.
this bigger field of sequential art. And I it kind of touched me spiritually walking around that room and seeing the artist there and thinking like, this is what I do. This is what I'm part of. And I had that same feeling when I went to my first American Library Association, and I'm on a panel
Hmm.
with Mark Siegel from First Second and Kazu Kibushi, who, I mean, take your pick of how to credit Kazu, but I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I the third person on this panel with these guys? So there were a lot of really, really beautiful welcome to the industry moments, and then, going to my first comics pro, and then meeting other people. Like I've had a life where it's been full of these moments where I'm like, this is great. But I think it's easier to be nostalgic of those first few ones. So I think that Ape and that ALA are
Yeah.
two moments that stay close to my heart to this day.
That Ape show, I think it was done by Dan Vado at Slave Labor. And
Oh
those
wow.
were
Okay.
just so special. Like, they just had such a nice energy to them, you know? I think that was where I remember Ape being where I first met Bendis, when he was just like
Oh my
a
God.
just getting started
I
self-publishing, you know?
Wow. Can't even imagine that. I mean, to think of Bendis at at Ape. Because when I went, who are the guests? That first one I talked about, it was a pretty stacked lineup actually. But Adrian
Yeah.
Tomine, Craig
Oh
Thompson,
yeah.
and Kate Beaton. Like those were the three guests there. Yeah, another thing that struck me there was meeting guests, like being able to meet Craig Thompson, who I knew little about at the time. I bought a copy
Yeah.
of Blankets on one day of Ape,
Blankets.
read it in one sitting that night, and the next day I'm like, I gotta get this guy's autograph, and to see how because
Yeah.
before then it seemed like anybody who made these things over here were like untouchable gods to me, right?
Right.
So that
Yeah.
was an interesting experience of like how, oh, okay, they're human, and I just need to wait in line for maybe 30 minutes, and I can meet them.
Yeah. Adrian, I'm actually looking at one of his a print of his that I have here in my office, and he actually lives here in Brooklyn, and
Oh,
his
okay. Wow.
his youngest and my youngest went to preschool together, so we would see each other briefly. But yeah, he's a sweetheart. He's really wonderful. All right, so you're at Viz Media for 9 years. Like
Yeah.
that's quite a stretch.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
My my goodness. And what sparked moving on for you? Did you get poached by the folks at Yen? What was the end look like? I'm always fascinated by this because I know that
Yeah.
it's always tough to talk about those kinds of things, but
Yeah.
yeah.
They did poach me, but they poached me at a time where I think I was ready to make the move. So let's say I had a couple of other opportunities to leave Viz sooner, but I
Sure.
remember considering the opportunities, and for different reasons, I wasn't ready, right? I wasn't ready because, either the opportunity didn't seem good enough or challenging enough for me to leave what I was currently doing at Viz, or
Mhm.
there were exciting opportunities at Viz that I knew were on the horizon. So it's like I can't leave right now. And for both of those times, something that's been consistent, and this started after that, I have a team, is I developed this real sense of belonging at Viz. To this day, a lot of people that work at that company are some of my best friends. And this was before,
Mhm.
for for all the young professionals who don't know a world outside of hybrid or work from home. When I worked at Viz, I worked in that office every day, and the positive thing about working in an office with people that often is you develop more memories and the ties become closer. Like one of the
Yeah.
guys that I can think of as a best friend from Viz, when I look back on my time working with him, I realized that we actually only worked together for 2 or 3 years. Like there's been a longer period of time since we've been coworkers at a time working together. But because I'd see him at lunch, because we'd play video games afterwards, because I'd sleep on his couch on occasion, it made those 3 years seem like a much longer period of time. I bring this all up to show that it was not an easy decision to leave Viz. I love that place and I love those people, and those sentiments still, you know, they're still true to this day in many ways. But when Yen came to me, that was a time where I knew I was ready. I as much as I was learning at Viz, I knew that I was ready for a bigger challenge. And at the time where I was thinking this, where I felt this the most, here Yen comes and says, "We want to hire you as sales and marketing director." It's kind of crazy to see how life plays out, but yeah, it's fortunate timing. But even with that, it was still a tough decision. But ultimately, I went with Yen, and I'm very very happy with that decision. Yen's been very nice to me.
What makes this a bigger challenge for you? Is it something about the team and the position, or is it more about the product and the company? What about that attracted you?
Attracted me to move to Yen.
Yeah, I mean specifically you said you wanted
Yeah.
a bigger project, a bigger challenge.
Yes. Yes. So I would say that when I worked at Viz, I was working specifically in the sales team, and there's a lot that can be done within the the specifics of sales. I would argue that,
Right.
though, that compared to the wider world of sales and marketing, there's a limit to that. And even in the world of comic sales, I think I was very aware that me calling myself a salesperson is different than the sales position of somebody who has to rely on periodical sales in a direct market, right? Like I think
Yeah.
somebody in my previous position who might have worked at another company, we might both have the same title, but the stuff they're doing is quite different from what I was doing. One of my best friends in the industry is Sam Cusack, and I remember hearing about how much he was
Yeah.
reaching out to stores to sell variants and things like that. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything like that. And I think just being, like you said, I was there for 9 years and I had made friends with a lot of people. And I think I was aware that there are bigger challenges that I could have, right? And the
Yeah.
prospect of running yen sales and marketing, and especially the time of doing it, I would be stepping into a role where I was given a lot of freedom and freedom to make mistakes and to truly grow from that. It's and it you know, I felt at the time it was a big honor, and I still feel that to this day. It's kind of wild to see how much they wanted me, and we're gonna trust a kid, to be frank, in this position. So that's really what led to the decision to move over from Viz over to Yen Press.
Well, so tell me about Yen. How does it distinguish itself from, say, Viz in particular as a company?
Yeah, sure. As a company, yeah, as you know, of course, there's the content itself, but as a company, one of the things that I think sticks out about Yen is the leadership. I would say immediately the leadership is one of the things that sticks out. It's a company run by two people, our publisher Kurt Hassler and our deputy publisher and editor in chief Ju-Yun Lee. And they're two of the most passionate and hardest working people that I've ever met. Definitely in this industry. And they're people who take the mentorship very seriously. They'll go about
Mm-hmm.
that in their own unique ways, but I can tell that they do they do take seriously the growth of the people under them, and wanting them to, and they hold us to very high standards, hold me to very high standards. I would say that, you know, I'm giving you a very political way of phrasing it. There's definitely been a lot of hard feelings and drama in between time, but from all of
Sure.
that came a lot of growth. The things that I'm capable of now, how much more resilient I am now, and how much more capable I am now has largely come from being an employee of Kurt Hassler and Ju-Yun Lee.
Tell me about Kurt specifically. This is a name that has come up in
Yeah.
my life a few times recently, and I don't believe I've ever met Kurt. What kind of
Oh
person is
wow.
he?
Okay. Kurt's a great guy, a very passionate guy, and probably one of the best poets when it comes to talking about the significance of what we do. And when I say we, I mean those of us who work in this creative field more on the business side of things, as opposed to the artists.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to give you a sense of the kind of person Kurt is, I remember sitting with him over drinks and him saying that what he sees us as publishers doing is we are servants of the artists. We sell the books, we print the books, we market the books, we do all of these things so that the creators themselves can just focus on what they do best, which is putting their themselves into their worlds and making these stories that we all love, and you know, love to experience. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to talk about what we do. Like, you know, when you think of, yeah, I don't think I've heard anybody else really address the pathos of what it means to be a sales director, or be a marketing director, or to be a production coordinator, or all these other support roles. You know, when we're here to service the creators, and I bring that up to give you a sense of the kind of person Kurt is, because that same sense of spirituality and responsibility is also true of the time when he was a buyer for Borders. You know, I asked him, like, would you like to be around the section and see, you know, the manga kids pull out books and read them on the floor? And he said, yeah, of course, I love that. So to know that
Yeah.
he's a person who's touched spiritually by these, what we do, you know, what we bring to the world, I think really gives
Yeah.
a perspective of what I think, how I think Kurt is as a person.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, as you mentioned, we are recording this the day before Thanksgiving, and yesterday I recorded an episode with Bink that
Hmm.
the charity that essentially helps
Yeah.
people who work in booksellers and comic shop sellers, and that we're going to be airing that one quickly, so that will be out the first week of December. But that charity came out of Borders. It started
Hmm.
off as the Borders employees essentially support system, right? So if if there's a flood in your area or something, as a border employee, that, you know, everybody would kind of band together, and they created this incredible charity that once Borders went away, the charity remained. and now just gives out something like $1.5 million a year to
Wow.
booksellers and comic shop owners and such. And I just love the idea now that I think probably you mentioning this with Kurt coming out and thinking about those manga kids that are just like seated in the aisles of those borders for so long, like how much of that I don't know, there was something special that they had there. It was
Yeah.
too bad that they couldn't keep going, because there was something really special about that company that kind of created a generation. All right, so you started with Yen in January of 2020,
Yep.
and anybody who's alive, any grown up who can say, you say the words 2020, and we immediately go, "Oh, bro, you did that."
Yeah.
So 2 months later, we're all locked down. What is that experience got to be like, starting a new job just before COVID hits off?
It was nuts, and it's the way I put it is it was already going to be a big year for me, a crazy year of change, because I had left San Francisco Bay Area after basically never having left home. I went to I grew up in the Bay Area, University of San Francisco, Viz for a decade after that, and then now here I am leaving the Bay Area for the first time to move to New York and to start a new job at a new company. It was going to be a crazy year, and I bring that up to say that in some ways, I think it was a less crazy year because of it was already going to be a year of transition, right? Like had I had say in another reality where I was still
Yeah,
at Viz, I might have felt the change a bit more there, to be completely honest with you. This place that I went to every day for close to a decade, where I had witnessed this editorial process that was very reliant on physical routing, or I was used to I was used to a lot, right? There was a lot of that was established, whereas for Yen, I was learning. I was learning, definitely at the time where COVID started. So yeah, I would say that it strangely made the transition less odd, but 2020 was still a crazy year. I mean, I remember just knowing about Barnes and Noble not ordering books, and anybody who knows about the manga industry knows how important Barnes and Noble is. I mean, that could be said about anybody, but
sure. Yeah,
particularly manga. Amazon only ordering the essentials, so basically not very much of our books at a time. Like, to see how low the sales were, it at the time it felt like this is as close to disastrous as you can get. So I will admit
yeah,
there was a little bit of fear. It's like modest fear, which I
sure.
think would be natural for anybody who would be in my position looking at the numbers. And this wasn't anything specific to Yen; it was more reflective of the industry and the world. So crazy, crazy times. To add another fun little dimension, I was supposed to have hired two people, right? Like I had two open positions when I stepped
Mm-hmm.
into Yen, but those positions were put on hold. So, uh, which I think was the right decision. So I was sales and
Sure.
marketing director, but I was also sales assistant. I was the one who was chatting with fans on Twitter, answering customer service
Yeah.
questions, going on Photoshop and making images to post on social media. So I got a good sales and marketing 101. It
You
was,
were
yeah, fun
sales and
times.
marketing. You
I
were
was
the
I was
director,
literally
the
sales and
assistant,
marketing.
the
Yeah. I
I've been there.
remember chatting with some friends about how a lot of these companies, these comic companies, sales and marketing is just a guy, some guy. That was definitely the case for Yen Press for the first year that I worked there.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. It is very often a guy, or the thing that the boss does after he does everything
Yeah.
else too. That's yeah, I totally feel that. I feel that deeply in my bones. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened at Yen since you've taken over,
Sure.
and I think there's some
Sure.
really interesting stuff that you guys have worked into. Um, let's begin with the manhwa line, the Korean
Yes,
comics.
yes.
2 years in, you guys start bringing that in. How does that distinguish itself from the product that you were already doing, and is there a shift for you, like, to in selling this kind of stuff?
I would say that as much of a distinguishing factor in many ways, the most popular of the works. It's not super different from manga is what I would say.
Okay.
Like there might, it reads left to right. There's color differences, but I would say that a lot of the tropes are largely the same. And I think we've gotten to the point where there's a lot of media, especially comics, which have been inspired by manga as it is. So that's sort of my thought on Korean comics in terms of its differences with manga. I would say that what I do want to touch upon though for that is how clear of a, as much as I say there are similarities, I think the delivery is probably the biggest difference. The delivery through the webcomic apps, the likes of a Webtoon or a Tapas. And
Right.
when we published Solo Leveling and saw its immediate success, it became very clear that this format of publishing content that originated off of these apps, that there's something to that. And I would say we kind of beat everybody to the punch. One of the most noteworthy successes after Solo Leveling was Lore Olympus, but for months before Lore Olympus came out, we were killing it with Solo Leveling. I think at that point it might have even been put on the radar with Walmart and Target. And if for anybody who has a Bookscan account and wants to look at the great sales from 2021 and 2022, that was the spike in sales of Solo Leveling, and then Walmart and Target stocking it. And then, yeah, with that success, and also with the background of Yen Press with Korean comics, we knew we had to be the company to champion this, because Yen had actually been a champion of Korean comics for much longer. Yen's founded, it depends on, what you consider the founding, but let's say late 2000s. And around that time, Yen was publishing comics through a magazine called Yen Plus. Included in that magazine was manga, original graphic novels, and Korean comics. So, in fact, Ju-Yun Lee, who's the editor in chief who I spoke of, is
Mm-hmm.
somebody who, in a past life, was editing magazines in Korea, which included manga and original content. She was actually making original Korean comic content way before she became editor in chief at Yen, and then was a leader in a company called Ice K Union, which was basically a gathering of Korean publishers who wanted to see the same success that manga was seeing in the English reading world. So they formed that company, and she was one of the leaders there. In fact, her being part of Yen Press came because Yen Press purchased Ice K Union. So, we have one of the biggest advocates for Korean comics, something that's been the case for a very long time, even before the time she joined Yen Press. We have this big success. If there's any company that was going to be a champion and the best in the industry for Korean comics, it was going to be us. So that's kind of the story for why we did it. I think you asked about if there's anything different in sales approach for it.
Yeah.
I would I
Yeah.
would say I would say not too much. I mean, there's smaller differences here and there, such as Webtoon having the option to advertise on platform. Maybe there's certain influencers we'd send a book to that we wouldn't send a manga to. But I would say that the approach that we take in promoting the content, manga content, to accounts and to fans, we largely follow the same thing for Korean content as well.
Right. You mentioned in that you were talking about the digital first,
Yes.
and you also brought in J Novel with its long list of digital to
Yes.
print. I'm really fascinated by this. Like we had a few episodes back, we had Tom Akel from Rocket Ship, who
Yeah.
does so many of those
Oh, yes,
those
yes, of course.
webtoons books,
Yeah.
and it's incredible to me that as as a man of my generation, and we came up with the internet kind of growing up around us, and there was always this fear that it would supplant print, that it would supplant like single issue comics and even OGNs or whatever. This idea that something can begin its life as a digital product and then truly become a success by going into print after it's a runaway hit. How are you thinking about that? I mean, obviously, you guys have been a market leader in this. How is that a one-to-one? Is anything is basically at that point, have you garnered so much attention? Have you garnered such a fan base that, just creating something that they can purchase? Is
Yeah,
that what is the deal is?
I would say that it's a pretty good indicator. I don't think it would surprise anybody for me to say that the series that may have had more reads and more subscribers will be more successful than the series where there will be less. But I would say it's not one to one. There are surprising times where you'll see a series that, comparatively speaking, has had fewer readers in its serialized format will have more people purchasing the book when it comes out.
Mm-hmm.
So it helps. It definitely helps. It's definitely an indicator that there will be people who've heard of it, in the same way that on the manga side of things, the series that are successful or series that might have been popular in Japan might have had an anime come out already. There's more people that have heard of it. But you will also see another factor where, oh, this series, which has had less reads, will do better because it's this really steamy boys love that a lot of people really want to collect in print. I think we're also at
Sure.
an interesting crossroads when the question of what does it take for somebody to purchase a book when it's available digitally. That's a conversation I'd say that's happening a bit more now, definitely in our space, when you see certain publishers going for higher treatment, stand edges, all of these sorts of things. And it
Yeah.
begs the question, to what degree do those extra treatments do making these books a collector's item for the fans who might have read it already? How important of a factor that is that? So yeah, it's an interesting time.
Yeah, no kidding. It really is fascinating. And also, I think it also kind of expands on this idea that I've trying to communicate what it is that we do, right? Oftentimes you talk about developing stories and then those stories can be used elsewhere and people go, well, like Hollywood. Well, yes, Hollywood, yes. At some point animated series, or live action series, or even, film, all of those things are available, but it's more than that, right? A true success really makes its money in several different markets. And
Yeah.
I guess there's no reason why that first market has to be in print. It can be digital, and then I mean it's the same principle. I just never really considered it that way. You're absolutely right. Um, all right, so I would love to talk about how you feel like you've been around, you came up in flying colors, you've been around the comics direct market enough. You have a feeling for the two differences in these two markets. I'm kind of wondering, what are the differences specifically? I'd like to dig into why you think American comic shops, the direct market specifically, why they struggle so much to bring in and manga and create those audiences. We have access to a large network of POS systems now, and I went in right before we started this conversation to look at. I was trying to keep it narrow so that I could see, just sort of like what the what the levels were, and so I just looked at last quarter. And when I looked just at solely at units that were sold through those stores, manga was maybe 1%.
Oh,
Now
wow.
I'm sure that would be completely different depending. It's a self-selecting group. They like, they were just talking about one quarter. It was not talking about dollars. There's so many things that would, but I can't imagine it being even if all those things were right. There's probably a variable of maybe 5%. Why is it you feel like, manga is killing so many other places, and yet the American comic book shop cannot seem to get a handle on this? Why is that?
I would say that I would say it's largely lack of expertise. I think I don't think it could be said that uh, and you know what? Yeah, let's think of any category, because I'm assuming that the people, we're still at a time where a lot of comic shop owners were the owners for years, and had their
Right.
business throughout the 80s and 90s, and they started their shop because they wanted to sell superhero comics, right? I was a fan of Batman, Superman, X-Men, and that's what I wanted to do. This is why I started this store, and I think for many of these owners, there's the feeling that there's manga's different, and I think that would be a fair assessment. It's literally a whole nother world and a whole nother level of expertise of and and they may not have that expertise. So if I were them and I was, I dedicated this shelf space over here to fill with manga, I wouldn't necessarily know the place to start. And I think it also goes to belief, right? Like I think anybody would dedicate this shelf space. Like, okay, Kristen McLean at Circana Bookscan, you're telling me that manga's selling this well, so I'll do this for the sake of my business, for the sake of that money. But
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that needs to be considered is I bring up the expertise. And when I think of expertise, I can think of nobody better than Morgana Santilli, who I am happy to say works at Yen Press, somebody who used to work at Comicopia. And she's, part of the lineage of workers at Comicopia who love manga. And I think you got
Mm-hmm.
to give credit to store Matt Lehman also, but outside of him, you got to give a lot of credit to the experts that helped curate those manga sections. Because there's one thing's the knowledge, but there's also the faith and the belief that this is something that should be there, and the passion for it. The person to hand sell it and to still believe in it at times where it's not going well. If I were the person who did not have that expertise and that passion, and I filled these shelves up with manga that wasn't selling, it would be very easy for me to say, well, I gave it a try, it's not working, so I think I have to alter course. It's interesting what you said about the percentage of manga, and I am a little disappointed to hear that, because one of the hopes I have is that we are actually getting to a time where a lot of the new leaders of the direct market are people who are closer to my age, people who grew up in an
Yeah.
era where they had read manga and loved manga. If I'm not mistaken, I think God, I can't believe his name escapes me, but the owner of Titan Comics in Texas, I
Jeremy.
think I think his daughter's a big manga fan. To give a
Yeah.
fun example of, I remember meeting Jeremy at my first Diamond Retailer Summit, and to see him. I hope I'm getting it right. I think it's Jeremy whose daughter is a manga fan, but to see, let's
I
say
think you're
it's her.
right. But
Yeah.
but knowing Jeremy, I would know that he would want to correct you and say that he's not the owner of Titan Comics. Cecilia, his wife, is
Oh,
the owner of
got it.
Titan
Yeah.
Comics. So
Well, thank you for that correction. But anyway, I bring that up to say that I would have hoped that, if we're not here already, that we are in a time where this new era of comic shop owners are people who have this belief in manga and will stock and curate it appropriately.
I would say so. I mean, I know that there are plenty of stores. I mean, I could name easily a dozen that have made big inroads into this, and I'm sure, like I said, it was, that this group that I'm reporting on. I mean, we're talking about a pretty large group, and even one or two of them might have 20% of their sales be manga, and it still be diluted. But it was really interesting to me to see that come up. But I agree with you. I think that we're starting to see that shift. We're definitely seeing a generational shift. There's no doubt, right? As
Yeah.
people enter their 60s and 70s, they are thinking about, how do I pass this along, or how do I close, and somebody else comes into place. I think you're going to see that shift, and it's a shift towards a generation that grew up with not only with manga, but also, like, even the generation below you that grew up with, I don't know, Dogman. That whole
Yeah.
generation is going to have a completely different perspective on what comics are, and it's going to shift what is available. Speaking of those generations, how are you? I know that a big part of your job is to reaching out to new markets and creating those inroads. How are you thinking about the YA and middle grade markets now? Is there something that you're doing, because a lot of your stuff is the marketing, the social media? How are you pushing to those demographics
Yeah,
these days?
that's probably the most challenging part of what I do. Among the
Mm-hmm.
many things that Yen Press publishes, manga, Korean comics, light novels also. I would one important section, but for me personally, a challenging section are the middle grade graphic novels. And what I've found is that you could separate publishing into adult publishing and children's publishing. And the big distinction there is the fact that children often aren't the decision makers for what they purchase. It's often the parents. And so, we could run as much meta ads as we want of a new middle grade graphic novel coming out. It's not necessarily how the success comes. It's not I mean, maybe we'll one day get to a point. I mean, you're parents, you know this more than me. I don't know how much kids have iPads and, are begging their parents
Oh,
to pre-order something the same way that I would point at a commercial when I was a kid. But let's say that we don't have that right now, then that's a
yeah,
huge challenge, is that the conventional ways that we promote our titles, our manga titles, our adult titles, is not necessarily as effective when promoting kids titles. I think with kids titles, it's two things. One is make sure you get it right on the sales side. Are the books in stores
in the
already?
stores.
Did Barnes and Noble get it? Like that's a huge victory for that category. And two, there's a lot of gatekeepers, a lot more gatekeepers, I'd say, for children's publishing more so than adult publishing. And did you make sure that you got approval from enough gatekeepers, trade reviews? Did you do anything to promote this in, I just came from NCTE, which is a National Council of Teachers of English, and there's a lot that could be done with English teachers to try to, promote books there. I would say that
Right.
not everything's a fit for that, but if you can have a fit, if there is a natural fit, are you doing everything you can in order to get your books into classrooms? So I would say that, I spoke of wanting to come into Yen Press to be challenged and to learn. I would say this field of children, YA and middle grade, that's been a big area of learning. And if I'm being honest with you, it's one where I still have a lot to learn.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a dynamic situation that is constantly shifting. You'll always be
For
learning. That would
sure.
be my guess.
Totally.
All right, so Yen Press is part of a larger organization involving Kodakawa, and I think that we're, Kodakawa. I think the interesting piece about Kodakawa is they've recently started opening manga like brick and mortar shops. Once
Yes,
again, that
yes.
sort of going backwards.
Yeah.
Talk about, I mean, has that affected the organization? How are you guys thinking about that internally? I love the fact that you're like taking that into your own hands and saying, let's create our own venues. I think that's incredible. Um,
It,
is that
yeah.
something at all you've been at all involved in?
Very, very lightly involved in. I've been
Okay.
involved with them in the sense that because they are a sister company, when we have in the flagship stores in New York, when we've had a few creators who've come in for, say, Anime NYC or New York Comic Con, and we'll collaborate with them for a signing. Out of all
Right.
the bookstores there, if there's two that we're going to collaborate with, one of them's going to be Manga Spot
Your own.
in New York. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's sort of to the capacity for which I've worked with them. But otherwise, my relationship with them has been as a fan. The head of that is, to no surprises, is Kurt Hassler, my
Mm-hmm.
publisher of Yen Press and one of my bosses. Because in addition to his publisher role at Yen Press, he's also the head of a division called Kadokawa World Entertainment that kind of oversees a lot of Kadokawa's efforts outside of Japan, including Manga Spot. Trying to basically start a manga chain here in the United States as of this recording. And to speak to why, like why manga stores? Well, one is because we are talking about Kurt Hassler. He was a guy in many ways who helped form the modern manga section. A guy who's very fond of retail and also very fond of the thought that when people talk about the availability of manga, they often speak about it in what I perceive as a pretty lazy manner, right? They're like, oh, okay, well, if there's manga, there's Amazon, and when there's no Amazon, there's a Barnes and Noble. What's missing from that equation is there's many places in this country where there isn't a Barnes and Noble nearby. And
Right.
for the Amazon thing, for as much as Amazon's been a big contributor to our sales success, more of our sales come from brick and mortar. We sell more to Barnes and Noble than we do to Amazon, and I think it speaks to, and I think anybody listening to this recording and to your show understands the appeal and the beauty of retail, of book retail. It's an experience that I think more people are now understanding, and I think as nice as a placement on a rotator or a similar product on a website might help sell more units, it doesn't as much as going into a store and having that feeling of discoverability. So there's that. Yeah, once again, going back to why Manga Spots formed, there are places that need to be served by retail, and that's the true beauty and the true vision. The flagship stores in New York City, but the hope is that we'll one day have Manga Spot locations in towns where the nearest Barnes and Nobles 100 miles away, so that those people can have the experience of going to their third place where it's filled with manga.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much, and I think that as we see the manga generation grow, it is definitely a fascinating market of consumers, of readers, more than we are collectors. Like they're just I'm always interested in the fact that there don't seem to be that many manga collectors. Like, you guys, for the most part, aren't really clamoring after our first printing. I remember going into a store in San Diego. This is probably 20 years ago at this point, but at the time it was a used manga store where they would take collections in and they would legitimately use a belt sander to smooth the edges where you had read it, and then resell it at a discount. And it was just an entire 10,000 square feet of manga. It was incredible, and it was busy the whole time I was there. It was crazy to me. Yeah. So I am for one fascinated, looking forward to seeing this grow, and I loved hearing about the Manga Spots. I think that's really, really smart, especially now, because you're right, discoverability is everything. It's, how are people going to find the next thing that they love? All right, we're starting to, I think, finish up here. There's something that your name came up a lot recently. You mentioned Sam Cusick earlier for his role at Boom and others, and now is basically the comics guy at Kickstarter. We've spoken to Julia. I can't remember Julia's last name.
Wolchuk. Yeah.
Joe Wolchuk. Thank you. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, Julia. I'm sorry. We worked together many years ago. So we've talked to a few people that I feel like are of a new generation of what we'll just call publishing executives, right? People who are kind of shaping and not yet fully at the top of the rungs of those ladders, but are obviously coming into positions of power and are obviously beginning to make changes about the way the comics industry, the way the publishing industry works. And I count you in that crew. And in fact, every time I started asking people about, who would you consider to be in this crew, your name was always near the top of the list. How do you feel like how do you feel like your generation of executives distinguishes itself from those of us who came before? What is it that's unique about your voice, do you think?
Wow, that's a good question. It's funny you bring it up because we jokingly together, Sam and I at the very least, we'll talk of ourselves as this specific generation. In fact, we would call ourselves the worst generation, which is a One Piece reference. This is a group that refers to the pirates who saw the last great age of pirates, and they're this new crop who want to emulate that. But when you ask the question of what I see as separating us from, say, previous generations, I admit it's a bit of a harder question to answer, because, well, I guess because it's, as high as a lot of us have come, I can't think of any of us who are quite at publisher status. I know there are a few that might have done that. And yeah, you know what? To be honest, like the answer that comes off the top of my head is there's probably more similarities with the previous generations than the differences. I think the thing that remains consistent is that we all love what we're doing. We all are touched spiritually about the world of art and storytelling. If there's any differences, it's the smaller differences, in my opinion. I think it's the fact that we might look at these arts more in a world sense. I think the world scene is probably more on the minds of the younger generation, the one that grew up with manga and has witnessed the rise of webtoon, and will witness many other countries have their time I think I have rumblings that the Middle East is cooking up a lot of exciting things. So that, and think of all the other countries and continents and regions where we have yet to see one of their stories become the New York Times bestseller. It'll happen. And I
Oh,
guess
certainly.
if there's any difference, I would say that it's probably being more conscious of the world scene than previous generations may have.
Yeah, and when I think about my generation of executives, of workers, of leaders, like we did come from a very narrow band. Like I came up where comics meant a very specific thing and a very specific genre, whereas for you, comics, it means everything. It's every voice.
Yeah.
It can come from anywhere. I think that's that I think in and of itself might be the distinction. What do you think? How do you imagine that our market will change as your generation shifts into this next step? Like, how do you imagine that effect of knowing that the world is a diverse place and that all of these voices are available to you? How do you think of that about that as there's the industry you are building, or do you?
So 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 sorry. What's the question again?
I guess my question is, where do you think this is going? You
Yes,
are,
yes, yeah.
whether you mean to or not, you're preparing for, a larger and larger roles, and in our industry is going to shift. Where do you think that's going?
I think we're going in a direction where there will be more variety in what's successful. Yeah, I think that's the direction that we're going in. We're already seeing that being the case. The fact that kids comics are as big as they are, the fact that LGBTQ plus content has a lot of bestsellers. These
Mm-hmm.
are both categories, the two that I just brought up, that have existed for as long as I've been alive. But I would
Sure.
say that it's hard to say that either necessarily had bestsellers, once upon a time. And now that we definitely see that being the case. And I think that'll continue to grow. I think you'll continue to see a wider variety in the stories that become successes, because I'm happy to say that we are in a pretty story-rich field where these have been coming out. But when you have more successes, you get even more of them coming down. So as rich as the
Yeah.
world of storytelling, the world of sequential comics, sequential art has been, I think it's going to be that much more rich as time goes on.
Yeah, I have no doubt. All right, get to a purely mechanical thing. We are
Sure.
working. You've been in the direct market now for a couple decades, as have I, and things have shifted. Um, Obviously, distribution is shifting in a dramatic way, and it feels like on a day-to-day basis it's shifting. I know that there's been some, Yen and Hachette have come up in the conversation about distribution over the last couple months. Do you have any predictions? Do you have any sort of feeling for how things are going to be shaking out? What are you looking forward to?
I think when it comes to the distribution side of things, what I predict will happen, or what I hope will happen, is a lot more comic shops, a lot more in what we call the direct market, to look at themselves as booksellers in a more general sense. I think those who have there's many who've had accounts set up with the likes of a Hachette Book Group, who distributes Yen books, or Penguin Random House, or go down the list, who've and I think that's often been done for other back end reasons, right? But I think what's sort of missing from that is, while I specialize in comics, I'm also a bookstore, and I think that will I'd like to think that'll affect comic shops in two different ways. One is the way that they go about their distribution and how they get books, but also sort of a mentality for how they structure their stores, and maybe tune in to more publishing news. One of the people who's spoken at Comics Pro in recent years has been Kristen McLean of Circana of Bookscan,
Mm-hmm.
whoever owns Bookscan at the time, and it's always Kristen singing the praises. And
Yes.
I think that it would be an interesting change and a positive one in my opinion if more comic shops and comic shop owners were to think of themselves as a part of this larger publishing industry as opposed to an us or them situation.
Yeah, it's interesting. We are going to have to find our way in that. I know that I personally have my own, I don't know, fears is probably a too fine a word of bookstores did not suffer well for the last two decades. Borders was as strong a book chain as there ever has been, and they went out of business.
Yes,
So
yes.
the idea of us becoming more like bookstores, I think that concerns me. But I do agree that we are going to have to find our place inside of the overall publishing world. I think that's obvious.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts of what the concerns would be. I wouldn't be surprised if the things that we see as benefits from becoming more, part of the publishing world are shared, because it kind of goes to the root of what we're talking about. Like manga, I think is this great opportunity for a lot of comic shops, and I would say that that's often associated more as something that's part of the more traditional book or trade
Yeah.
world. So things like that, paying more attention to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I absolutely, I believe that comic shops specifically should absolutely focus part of their attention on what is working elsewhere, and then understanding how they can bring that home and take a piece of that. I know that when I was, running a comic shop 15 years ago, one of the biggest successes that we had that I was not expecting was when we opened a Scholastic account and then started pre-selling Harry Potter books. Like when there was brand new ones, and we would sell cases and cases of them, even though there's a Barnes and Noble, there's a Borders, there were so many other outlets, but we were still selling so many of them. And I think that there's definitely opportunities that are missed by the direct market by not looking at what the overall trends are and then figuring out how to take advantage of them, how to be involved. A lot of stores have just completely missed the boat on YA and middle grade and manga, and hopefully they'll find their way back in. But I think that some of the risk, though, really is those models. Those models allowed for structure in a way that the comics has really fights structure. Like we are just such a group of independently minded people, and yet the book market really became super structured. I mean, the quintessential structure is PRH, right? Penguin Random House, a German company. They are very, very structured. Their institutionalized systems are very rigid. And, and that's wonderful because you can count on them. But it also means that Borders and Barnes and Noble can take the place of the indie bookstore, and then Amazon can take the place of Borders and Barnes and Noble because of that structure. So what I'm saying is I don't know that it's necessarily all, strength. I think there's definitely some weakness in there.
I hear you. I hear you. That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, thanks for sharing it. I think we're gonna have to meet up for coffee for me to get that, get even more.
This is my hope. Well, let's start wrapping up. What when you look at the future, as we've talked a lot about the future here. What do you feel like is the biggest risk that faces comics right now?
The biggest risk? My goodness. Huh.
You don't have to have an answer. We don't even have to leave this in.
Yeah. I think the biggest risk that's for comics in general is, and I could be completely wrong here, but I feel like it's been harder for. I think it's been a while since we've seen really strong mainstream hits with certain categories than before. I'm privileged to work in one of the categories where I feel like we've had a good amount of mainstream hits. To give you an example of a time where I feel like there were more mainstream hits, let's look back at the time where I started working in the comics industry. But what's ironic, ironically, it was a time where manga was considered on the downturn. But even in that downturn period, you'd still see the latest volume of Naruto sell like gangbusters and get stocked at every Walmart. But in addition to the success that was happening at manga at the time, this was also the time where the Scott Pilgrim movie had just come out. And while that's considered not to be this box office success, you would still see Scott Pilgrim volumes selling on Bookscan. All 6 volumes appear week after week. You would see Walking Dead killing it. The strongest time for Walking Dead. You'd see Watchmen selling at crazy levels, and the fallout from Watchmen is that those people also became interested in Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One. So it felt like a very healthy time for variety, is what I would say when I look back at that period of time. And when I think of today, and apologies if this comes off as an ignorant statement, but I don't feel that I'm seeing nearly the same level of variety and successes outside of manga. And to me, that's a
Mm.
big concern. One, because that is something that a lot of comic shops are, at least as of right now, more reliant on. But also as a fan, it's something that I see as a little unfortunate because, we started by me talking about, loving X-Men at the same time that I was loving this stuff here too. I also am a very passionate fan for Western comics. And I think while a lot of good stuff may be coming out, I think what can be said is that it seems to be harder for people to find a starting point for one reason or another. And I'm not sure why that's the
Mm.
case. I think that before there would be, I feel like Watchmen did a lot before to get people interested in seeing what more there was with the world of Western comics. I can definitely say that was the case for me. I think Watchmen was a big part of why I was going, I was going to Flying Colors a lot in high school, but I was going much more in college because I was like, okay, well, this was an amazing read. Hey guys, what else is there like this? And
What's
I don't
next?
know. Yeah, I don't know if that's happening as much nowadays. So I would say that there's certain categories that have seemed to have resonated with today's generation. There's other categories where I'm concerned that you're not seeing that as much as you did in the past. So I would say that's what I would say is the biggest risk. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, I see that. Um, and the runaway hit though is that I wonder if it's a thing of the past, right?
I'm
We're not all
yeah.
watching Seinfeld on Thursday nights
Yeah.
anymore. You know?
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. This might not be a failing on the part of the publishers really, but I think the risk is still there. I think there's still
Sure.
something that
Absolutely.
uh if we were going to say there's anything missed from previous generations, I think that runaway hit benefited a lot of people, and I guess it's not even a recent phenomenon that we haven't been seeing it, but that makes it even that much more the risk because in
Sure.
a way, what we all we as in like publishers, like a manga publisher, we kind of make our success off of the casual audience. We really do. Like there's the I remember I took a writing class from a former Viz coworker, in fact, who mentioned that a bookseller's job is to hand some book. The year that Da Vinci Code was out, a bookseller just keeps handing people copies of the Da Vinci Code. You brought up Harry Potter. For that year, that person's job is to hand out copies of Harry Potter. Of course, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
other books selling in addition to those, but I would say that we are an industry that makes a lot of our success off of the casual following.
100%. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that I don't think I have another choice. I just love stories so much, and I guess if there's if there's anything to give hope, it's just that people we're just so naturally built to be touched by stories and moved by stories, and for it to give our lives meaning, and I think I think there's a special way that what we do delivers stories, right? Like sequential
Right.
art delivers stories in such a unique and interesting and wonderful way. And because of that, I feel like it'll always be present. And I think there's a lot of potential for us to see the best days of this industry ahead of us.
No doubt, no doubt in my mind. Especially with folks like you at the wheel. How can people find you, Mark? How can people hear more about Yen and what you guys are doing? Where should they go looking?
Sure. Well, Yen Press is pretty easy. Just follow us on. I still call it Twitter. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Yen Press for our
Are you on
Korean
Blue
comics.
Sky yet?
You know what? We did make a Blue Sky. I think very soon we're gonna have to start posting on Blue Sky a bit more. I feel like more
Yeah,
so than a year or so ago when people were hopping on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Threads. It really does seem to be more of a thing now. So please
I'm starting to
please
feel
look
that way.
forward to the Yen Blue Sky being used. As so that's how to follow Yen Press. As for me myself, I'm not a big social media person to be completely honest. So but there are times where I hope to change that. I guess, we're talking to a group of professionals, so please don't hesitate to add me on LinkedIn. I love
Absolutely.
I love knowing industry people. I love talking to industry people. So, I do make an effort to make it to the comics pros and ALAs of the world. But short of those in-person appearances, if you'd love to connect more directly, don't hesitate to message me on LinkedIn.
And if nothing else, I would like to wholeheartedly recommend iksue.livejournal.com where you can read all of
Oh my God.
Mark's.
You know what? I did not know it was still around. Like for some reason
It's
I
still
thought,
there.
oh my God, I can't believe it. You know what you're missing though is I think the photo bucket account that I used for that live journal might
Yeah.
be gone because you're probably only getting
Well,
half the story. I used to have so much fun images on that live journal as well.
the funny part is I think they're all still there, but they all have the photo bucket image, like the
Oh
watermark just
yeah.
slapped right on top, but you can still see you and all your high school friends. It's
Oh really? Oh,
adorable.
I love
It
that.
is
I'm so happy to hear
so
it.
cute.
I'm gonna have to go down memory lane. Thank you very much for reminding me it exists and is still around.
you you're very welcome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark. This has been so much fun. I was really looking forward to it, and it definitely delivered. My name is Adam Freeman. This has been Comic Industry Insiders. I work with a group called Prana Direct Market Solutions. You can find us at pranadm.com. And you can sign up for our new newsletter. So that's fun. We just started putting that out. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
And happy, I don't know, Valentine's Day, whenever this thing's coming out, I guess. We'll see. Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Namaste,
Thank
y'all.
you. Take care, everyone.